Is it about changing the world?
Problem that's right in
Or is
front
it
of
your
you?
generation's time?
Let's find out.
If we were alive 100 years ago, we would be walking along the dirt roads of this very city, tiptoeing and holding our nose. Because of this. Manure. Back then, between 100 and 200,000 horses lived within New York City, primarily to transport New York's exploding population. Each horse produced between 15 and 30 pounds of manure a day. It piled the streets, and it was growing. More horses meant more manure, which meant debilitating disease, nauseating smell, and swarming flies. The business innovation around the day was on removing it. And so businesses sprouted that tried to clean it by shoveling it, and in some cases even burning it. But the piles kept growing faster and faster. Meanwhile, there was a man who was not too concerned about the manure problem. In fact, he ignored it. He ignored what he saw as the distraction of the day, as a nuisance of the day. Instead, he focused on a different need, on a broader need, on the real need. He lived 600 miles away in southeast Michigan. His name? Henry Ford. And he produced something called the Model T. Ford revolutionized transportation, and by the way, eliminated the manure problem. Ford is an example of someone who I would classify as a disruptive innovator, or someone whose technologies beget and spawn new industries that change the lives of millions, and in some cases, billions. He's different than a common innovator, or somebody whose innovations are incremental in nature. But what separates a disruptive innovator from an incremental innovator, a common innovator? It's undeniably a mix of things, from luck to circumstance to intelligence. But I think there must be a pattern, a conscious pattern that has transcended both decades and continents. So let's move to the other side of the world, to Sub-Saharan Africa. It's 1998, and a young man by the name of Mo Ibrahim is sick and tired of the stories of his continent. Like the Ugandan woman who owns a salon who has to trek 100 miles to Kampala every week to order a product for her salon and then come back next week when it's ready, both days having to shut down her salon and not get the revenue that would just pay for her son's new pair of shoes. Or the rural farmer in Kenya who wants to know what his crops are selling for in Nairobi, so if once he could just time the market right, he would break into the black for that particular season. Or the blood bank in Dar es Salaam that sends a man out to a different village every single day and asks, do you need blood, only to arrive at a particular village and say, you know what, if you had just come 2 days earlier, you might have saved the life of the woman who was in childbirth. But Ibrahim didn't try to establish fixed crop prices or establish a distribution system or even combat maternal health inequalities in Tanzania. He had an improbable dream: to change the problems of his continent, and many like them, by not attacking them directly. He thought that instead, if he just created the infrastructure of tomorrow, he may solve the problems of today faster. So he raised venture capital right after the dot-com bubble burst. He did it in an economic climate in which corruption was often the hardest thing to avoid. He did it in a political arena where war was going on in most of the countries he was trying to change. In what became Celtel, he brought to 14 countries within Africa the infrastructure necessary for something that today we take for granted: the mobile phone. Now the Ugandan woman could simply call and order her product. Or the rural farmer in Kenya could call the market and figure out what his commodities were trading for. And the blood bank could receive requests for transfusions on an as-needed basis. Before Celtel, there were 2 million mobile phone subscribers in Africa. By 2004, 100 million. And today, over 300 million mobile phone subscribers in Africa. All because Ibrahim built for tomorrow and was bent on making life better. A promise, a creed that would become the name of the Celtel brand. Now let's transport to the present. 2 teenage American boys are diagnosed with severe myopia, but realize how blessed they are to have ophthalmologists who can take it to close to 20/20. they launch an organization called ReSight with the goal of ending treatable blindness. They think, money is the problem. The reason people don't have access to healthcare is because money. So they raise money, and then they send it over to hospitals who provide treatment. But then a mentor approaches them and tells them the way they are going, they're going to need to raise billions upon billions of dollars to even touch the problem. And that too, maybe if they happen to raise that money, it still might not touch the people who actually need it. So one of those two people was me, and the other was my younger brother, Sujay. And not only did we have myopia in our eyes, we had Innovator's myopia. We were nearsighted, not focused on the grander problem, and that too, doing it in an unsustainable way. We weren't building an ecosystem that could potentially solve the problem at a macro level. After months of thinking, we eventually arrived at a pilot in which we take rural women who are vision impaired and then get them the training as well as the treatment that they need. They then go back to their communities as vision guardians, where they're responsible for the health and treatment of countless peers. Already, more people have been treated and trained, and jobs have been created than when we were just throwing money at the problem. There is a pattern of solving these problems, a pattern that both Henry Ford and Mo Ibrahim had, and that I am trying to do myself. Ibrahim and Ford saw a particular situation in which there were countless problems, countless symptoms. But they attacked the problems not directly. They didn't attack them head on. They thought the way to solve the problems of today aren't necessarily to attack them directly. They solve the problems of today by building for tomorrow. So how can we be disruptive innovators like Ibrahim and Ford? How can we make this happen too? Well, I would argue that the how is in the why. If we just keep asking the question, why, we'll eventually arrive at the real need, and we'll eventually be able to think like disruptive innovators. So let's do an example related to air pollution. We can go through the question and then figure out how a disruptive innovator would think about this. So first, why is there so much air pollution? Well, a broadly simplified answer would be, there are a lot of people in this world, a lot of cars, and cars produce carbon monoxide, which therefore causes air pollution. We could stop there. Two things we could do. First thing is we could stop there and say, okay, let's make cars that make less air pollution. And if you think about it, that's the exact trend that we are seeing today with hybrid and electric vehicles. Or we could do what a disruptive innovator would do, which is keep questioning. Why do people use cars? Because it's affordable, convenient, and pretty personal. Why don't people use another method of transportation? It's often not available, perhaps too expensive, maybe not as quick as it needs to be. Will the problem of air pollution increase or decrease? Probably increase if we don't do something about it. What other problems do we see? Well, there was just a 10-day, 60-mile-long traffic jam in Beijing, and so on, and so on, and so on. We can keep questioning, but a disruptive innovator would eventually arrive at the conclusion that perhaps, once again, the transportation system of today is outdated. And so if we think like disruptive innovators, we may be able to come up with a new method of transportation which could solve a lot of these periphery problems like air pollution, but also like traffic jams. So this building for tomorrow thing, it applies all over. In the United States, if a country that spends more than 4 times as much money on those over 60 as on those under 18, if we just allocated some of our dollars instead of Social Security to education or entrepreneurial investment or scientific research. Or for healthcare, especially for diseases like heart disease, in which 70% of the disease is related to lifestyle and diet. What if some of our dollars went to subsidizing prevention rather than Plavix? Or for our generation, for you and me, what if we approached some of our generation's toughest problems? Climate change, intergenerational religious conflict, from the lens of an innovator. But not just any innovator, a disruptive innovator. Somebody who solves today's problems by building for tomorrow. And in that lens, boldly overcomes innovators' myopia. Thank you.